1-minute count. Hi, everybody.
Sounds beautiful, Ben.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you all so much. I hope everybody's filtering in, getting in successfully. So that piece was a piece that I commissioned last year from an LA-based composer named Derek Spiva. Derek is a friend of mine, and he wrote this piece called Grace Unbound based on a performance that Aretha Franklin gave at the Zion Baptist Church in, I believe, 1972. And it sort of spoke to me for this moment. Before we begin, I feel compelled to address the events of the past week involving the murder of George Floyd and the important conversations about equality in America that are unfolding. I feel like as an artist, art in its highest and most potent form is a cathartic and a transformative force that calls on all of us as performers and music lovers to grapple with issues of inequality and injustice. The world of classical music is too often one that looks to the past. But I think that music's greatest power, whether it's the music of Bach or Derek Spiva, is to be a driving force and a calling for us to be our most thoughtful and best selves. The Symphony announced today that we're the recipient of the Catalyst Fund grant from the League of American Orchestras, which is amazing news. I think that we need to use this opportunity as a symphony community to develop concrete programs and opportunities to break down barriers in the areas of music education, programming, and performance. Programming music of composers from diverse backgrounds such as Derek doesn't have to be a compromise. As our concerts featuring the music of Florence Price last November demonstrated, there's a wide and deep pool of lesser heard musical voices that can inspire musicians and music lovers at least as much as the music of our most commonly performed composers. I believe that loving and appreciating art is by necessity a philosophical endeavor that requires us to re-examine our worldview and to meditate on notions of right and wrong and on what kind of society we want to live in. Before we begin our conversation, Warren has very graciously agreed to perform the Prelude to the Bach G Major Suite. I hope we can all take this time to reflect on what is going on in our country right now and how we can move forward from here. And afterwards, I would love to have just a brief moment of silence. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for your beautiful and kind words. It's so important in this time. And just before I play, I just wanted to read a brief quote. I've been doing a lot of reading and reflecting on African-American authors and artists recently, and there's a quote from Maya Angelou that really spoke to me. I'm reading off my phone here. So here's the quote. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again.
Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Warren. That was absolutely breathtaking.
Thank you. Again, thanks for your beautiful words, Ben. It's very well spoken.
So luckily, not only was that a gorgeous and I think very cathartic piece to have played at this moment, but it sort of brings us into our first topic of discussion for today. For those of you who follow the symphony on social media, one of the really cool projects and ongoing projects that that the symphony's been featuring has been Warren's Bach Project, which I don't even know how you did during all of this time, but basically for those of you who are not familiar with it, over the course of a number of weeks, Warren recorded videos of every single movement of every single Bach cello suite. And it was really cool to get to hear it in its completion, but also, I mean, it's in its complete form, but also sort of spread out so you could really appreciate each individual movement for what it is. And I encourage any of you who have not seen it to go check it out. So I'm wondering, Warren, first of all, if you could tell us what the inspiration was for that.
Sure. So I think the initial inspiration was twofold. Number one was staying in playing shape, because if I don't make goals for myself, I feel like I would have watched a lot more Netflix than I already have been watching. And two is just feeling like there was a way to still stay connected with our wonderful audience who we really miss so much and miss being on stage. I know it's not the same sticking an iPhone in my face and playing Bach. I wish it could have been in the concert hall for people in person, but I just felt that it was really imperative to stay connected to the audience.
Yeah, well, I thought it was just such a cool idea and so impressive because I know those are not easy either technically or philosophically to sort of tackle. It's sort of like the Mount Everest of cello literature.
Actually, to add on to that, I should also say that I've sort of been, I had this idea a couple years ago that I should just practice them to where I could be able to play them kind of, I don't want to say play them in my sleep, but it was a summer one summer and I was playing a lot of weddings and I thought to myself, I wish I had more of these movements just ready to go. So I spent a lot of time learning them really intensely. I probably spent more time on the first few suites because they get a lot more technically difficult from 4 through 6. 6 was actually written for, most likely written for a 5-string instrument with an E string, an extra string on top, so it goes up a lot higher. But the good thing about doing them in order from 1 through 6 is I have more time to practice the harder ones at the end.
Yeah, it's a good point. We've had a number of questions come in about where people can go to hear those. And for those of you who aren't on Facebook or Instagram, I believe they were all uploaded to YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and just check out the Pacific Symphony page, they should all be there. And if you start sort of the furthest back and work your way forward, you'll go through all the suites.
I think they're labeled episode 1 through 36, kind of like, yeah.
Okay, great. So I encourage you, if you have not gotten a chance to hear them, it's really something. And you get to watch the progression of Warren grow a beard over a number of weeks, which is fun.
It's gone now. It took me like 30 minutes to get rid of it. Yeah.
So another question that we had come up that I think might apply to these, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. We had a question submitted in the RSVPs. Have you ever given up on a difficult work?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't recently. I think when I was probably a while ago, I remember specifically in high school, I was trying to learn Tchaikovsky's Rococo variations, and I got to the last variation and I gave up. I came back later and learned it, and it's really difficult. The last variation, it lasts like 2 or 3 minutes, the last variation, but there's so much in there. I did come back to it later, and I think nowadays when I have that problem, I really like to get obsessed with figuring out what exactly the really small chunks of the piece are that are giving me problems, and just really breaking it down and practicing even like one note or 2 shifts in a passage that give me issues, and then usually things get a lot easier from there. But to answer the question in short, yes, I have, and I'm trying harder these days not to give up on pieces.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have felt that way. I know I have. And I know, at least for me personally, and maybe you too, I find a lot of times if I have a particular passage or a particular piece that's just not working, no matter how hard I try, a lot of times if I go leave it for a week, 2 weeks, it's like my mind is there working this whole time. And then I come back to it and it's like magically certain things have been figured out, which is very nice.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So keeping with our sort of Bach project, I wanted to ask also, these are sort of, like I said, sort of a monumental work for cello, 6 suites, right? And 6 movements each.
Yes.
So could you give us a little bit of a background on these suites, and maybe talk to us a little bit about how they're structured?
Absolutely. So as Ben said, there are 6 suites and each has 6 movements, and it's really a set of dances. Each one has a prelude, which is what you just heard. And then after the prelude, you have 5 different kinds of dances in each suite. And it's interesting to think about Bach and the fact that he, during his own lifetime, was not as celebrated as he is today. I think it's back in those days, composers like Handel were really more revered than Bach was, and he had sort of a I don't know if the right word for it is revival, but it's sort of a re-interest in his music in the 19th century. But the cello suites were still not played very often, and they were viewed as like etudes or technical exercises, which is interesting. But later in the 19th century, the famous Puerto Rican Spanish cellist Pablo Casals, or Pau Casals, came across an old copy in a music store in Barcelona. And he spent his whole life working on them and really championed them to become what they are today. And I've actually got my wife and I went to Barcelona a few months ago, and I bought this statue of him.
Oh my God, that is amazing.
Yeah,
I love the pipe.
I know, right? My plan was originally, I'll put him so you can watch us for a little bit. Can you see him?
Oh yeah.
You can see him. There we go. The plan was, I'm still covering him. So my plan was to have him next to my bed, so I woke up every morning feeling inspired to practice, and then one morning I woke up and he just scared me. So I moved him, but now he watches me when I practice, which is kind of intimidating, but good. And yeah, he's a really important figure because I think especially with everything going on in the world nowadays and all the turmoil, it's important to look to someone like him because he really viewed himself as as a human first and a musician second. And he was hugely active as a humanitarian. And I think it's fair to say that he sacrificed a lot in his career. He would probably have had an even bigger career if it weren't for his activism. The height of his career would have been during the Spanish Civil War and World War II, and he sided against Franco and against that side. And he was kind of outcast from Spain and wasn't allowed to play there. And even after, or I should say, he chose not to play there. Even after the Spanish Civil War was over, he refused to play in countries that recognized the fascist government of Spain, which I think is just, it's huge. Takes a lot of courage to take a stand like that. So we owe him a lot in that regard, and then also for bringing these Bach suites really to the forefront. Actually, last thing I'll say about him is that he made his really famous recording of them in I believe the end of the 1930s, which was during the Spanish Civil War. So all this stuff going on that was so important to him, and he was recording the Bach suites. It's just incredible. Yeah,
that's amazing. And I wonder, hopefully maybe we can even put a link up to his recordings of those if people are interested in those also, because I think that's
absolutely, yeah,
fascinating. I also think it's really interesting you talking about having him either at your bedside or watching while you practice, because I think, wasn't it Pablo Casals who was famous for saying, like, he was like in his 90s and so he was practicing a lot, and someone was like, Mr. Casals, why do you keep practicing? And his response was like, oh, I think I'm getting better.
Yeah, yeah, that's a quote of his. Yeah,
which I think is very inspiring when I'm feeling lazy.
Definitely.
And just a little bit about the structure of them, because a lot of these pieces are actually, at least the markings are of what would have been different dances, right?
Yeah.
So like, how does that factor into your interpretation of works like this?
That's a good question, and that's where you'll hear a lot of differences in cellist interpretation. So I'll just run through the way each suite is structured. So there's a prelude, an Allemande dance, a courant, which is a faster dance, Sarabande, which you'll hear a lot of differences in how that's played. A lot of people play it on the slower side. Some people play it a little more upbeat, so it maintains the feeling of a dance. And that one, I believe the second beat is the strongest beat of the measure, which makes it really interesting. And then a set of minuets, bourrées, or gavottes, depending on the suite. And then it ends with a gigue, which is really, those are some of my favorites to play because they all have this sort of well, it's like the energy of a jig. It has this sort of swashbuckling energy. Not all of them, but I'll play one later that really has that kind of energy, and it's a lot of fun. So I love, as much as it was fun to record them individually, it's more challenging and even more fun to play them back to back and to think about how one transitions into the next. I don't know if anyone caught Yo-Yo Ma's live performance of all 6 suites, I think 2 weeks ago or so. It's just incredible that what he did, and played all 6 of them, and between a couple of them didn't even stop. He just went directly from one suite into the other. And actually, I don't know about some people, I don't play a wind instrument, but I still have, when I play these suites, if I play more than one suite and I'm playing for a long time, sometimes what happens to me is one side of my body goes numb because I stopped breathing correctly, because they're all something I got to work on, but they're all so continuous and the music doesn't stop. So sometimes I have had the experience of like a side of my body being numb, and people that have watched me play say my face goes like this or something.
Talk about the transformative power of music, literally.
So I should take a lesson from you, Ben, on breathing properly.
Maybe. I feel like I'm about to pass out half the time. So just before, like you mentioned, you've agreed very graciously to play a number of selections from these throughout the hour. So we'll have something to look forward to. But since we were on the topic of Pablo Casals, you brought us a special piece that he wrote. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yes.
So this piece is called Song of the Birds. It's a Catalonian folk song that was made popular by Casals. And there are a lot of recordings of not just Casals, but a lot of cellists playing it on YouTube. It's really hauntingly beautiful, I think. So here it is.
Wow, that was amazing. Absolutely beautiful. And I think, unless I'm wrong, for those of you who came to it, I think a few years ago when Yo-Yo Ma came and played the Dvorak cello concerto with the symphony, I think that was actually his encore. And yeah, I love that piece, and you play it just, wow, the best.
Thank you so much. Beautiful piece.
So for those of you who haven't gotten to meet or gotten to really know Warren yet, you know, he's pretty new. You've been here less than a year, right? You started officially in October, I think.
Yeah, it started with the Tchaikovsky 6th concert. What a way to start.
Yeah, that's quite a way to start. I just wanted to sort of give everybody a little background in you, and then we can sort of dive into a little bit.
Sure.
So you actually grew up in Southern California, right here, right? In Cypress, was it?
Yeah, Cypress, North Orange County, yeah.
Amazing. And Warren actually was a student at Orange County School of the Arts, which it's just very cool to have sort of some homegrown talent coming back. You then went on to attend Juilliard, Indiana University, and were the founding cellist of the Verona Quartet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
So I just think you've had such a fascinating sort of trajectory that's then brought you to the symphony. And I think, you know, all of it's very impressive and very interesting, but sort of the thing that I wanted to start talking with you about was sort of your involvement with chamber music specifically, because I think that it's really interesting how you sort of went through that journey and are now principal cellist of the symphony. Anyway, I think it's very cool.
Thanks, Ben.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Verona Quartet, and also maybe a little bit about how it got started?
Sure. Oh, thanks for the introduction. So we formed as students at Indiana University. I think it takes a lot of combination of things to have a successful string quartet. It's not only the playing level, but it's also kind of the timing of it and the personality matches, and it's also everyone being on the same page that they really want to go for it. We were very fortunate in a lot of ways. We formed the year that the great quartet, the Pacifica Quartet, came to teach at IU, and they came in the year we formed and really wanted to place a huge focus on chamber music. So we, from the very get-go, they really had our backs and really mentored us. And they suggested that as a new quartet that we go and do compositions and rehearse a lot. They told us that it needed to be like our job, like our full-time job. So we started rehearsing 6 hours a day, which we did our best to keep up for a long time. It was tougher once we started having more concerts. But in the beginning with a group like that, especially because there's no conductor, you really need the time to get to know each other's playing. And it was hugely musically. It really helped my musical growth, I think, because when you're rehearsing that much and when you have that sort of camaraderie, it's almost like I was having lessons for 6 hours a day, because I was trying to figure out how I could match violinists and a violist, which as a cellist is pretty hard to do, trying to match their sound and technique. So it was really big for me, and I think it also developed my ability to listen, which I really love to carry over to the orchestra and exercise that in orchestra. It's something I tried to do is, and in Quartet, we had this goal for ourselves that if you were not playing the melody, you had to be listening to whoever's playing the melody with 80% of your ear, and then yourself with 20% of the ear. And then I think if you're playing the melody, you should be listening a little bit more to yourself. But it's a lot harder than it is saying it. It's really hard to not listen to yourself when you're playing. So it's a good exercise, I think. So that tangent aside, we went on and did quite a lot of competitions, both nationally and internationally, and spent a couple years at Indiana with great mentorship and teachers, and then we auditioned for the graduate resident quartet program at Juilliard, and were accepted and spent 2 wonderful years there working with the Juilliard string quartet. So it was a really informative time, and I love to carry those concepts of chamber music over and play with them in mind with orchestra as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so cool. And I'm, as another musician, but someone who, didn't have that experience, I'm just curious, because for me, it's like, even just being on my own in music school, for example, and practicing hours a day and like going off to do competitions or going off to auditions, it's like, that's stressful enough. And I feel like the idea of doing that with 3 other people adds a whole nother layer of a lot of things. So I'm curious, like you mentioned competition specifically, and for those of you out there who aren't familiar, they won a lot of them, and including competition like Fishoff competition, Wigmore Hall competition, Osaka International competition, Melbourne International competition, Concert Artists Guild in New York. It's like really impressive. So like, what was your experience like doing something that high stress and also sort of being a team member? And like, yeah, I'm just curious what that was like. And like, were you guys traveling together, and did you guys have sort of a unified strategy for how to do things in terms of competitions?
Yeah, that's all good questions. And while I'm thinking of it, I should give them a shout out, because they're still having a great career, and they just won the Cleveland Quartet Award.
Wow.
This past year, so it's a huge accomplishment for them. The Verona Quartet. So we the competitions were high stress but fun. It's a little bit, I want to say, easier doing it with 3 other people. Once you're on stage, it's probably, I'd say it's a bit more comfortable than being out there by yourself for a competition. And we did travel together whenever we could, and the competitions were, I think, really important to our growth, just giving us a goal to work towards. And I think that a lot of those competitions are really so beautifully run, and you get to play in some of the most amazing halls in the world. I still think my favorite chamber music hall to play in is Wigmore Hall in London. In that competition, we got to play there, and it was so beautiful there that it was like impossible to be nervous. It's really stunning. And in those competitions, I sort of, to deal with the stress, I can just speak for myself personally, that something that helped me get over that is to realize that if I'm doing my job, and if the quartet is doing its job, then the audience should be thinking not about what a great quartet this is they're hearing, but what a great piece of music they're hearing, and how great the composer is. So in a way of thinking about that, it sort of takes the spotlight off of me and makes it about the music rather than about me or about the group. So that's something that's I think helped me with other performances in my life and with auditions that I've taken as well. I'm just really focusing on how great the music is and bringing these composers to life in a way. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's a great, totally. I think that's a great point. And, another thing you touched on that I want to explore a little more was you mentioned that, there are a lot of things about being a chamber musician that have then translated into being an orchestral musician. And I'm wondering if you could maybe elaborate on, are there any specifics, both sort of when you're working sort of in that front row of strings, working with the other principals, and also sort of even in a bigger picture way, like with all 80 to 100 of us?
Yeah, of course. So some comments I've gotten from audience members of Pacific Symphony. I've gotten several comments about sort of being visually locked in with the other principals, and they feel that the string principals do a good job of that in the string front stand. So there's that with chamber music, but then I think even more important is just always listening, and not only listening to the strings, but listening to everything going on in the hall and the winds and the brass, and just keeping your ear on somewhat on yourself, but then primarily on the whole sound of the orchestra and what's going on harmonically. I think it's a little bit easier in orchestra since you have a conductor to forget to turn your ears on, but it's something that I always remind myself of. And that's what I really love about playing with Pacific. One of many things. Not only is it so much fun to collaborate and make music with Carl, but I do feel that everyone is really good about listening to each other and really making music together in a way that feels like chamber music on a larger scale.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I, my first guest 2 weeks ago was Orly Shaham, who obviously is very passionate, involved in chamber music, and who runs Pacific Symphony's Cafe Ludwig. Did you get a chance to perform with her this past season? I know you have some performances coming up this next season with her.
Yes, we played a Cafe Ludwig concert in February. The only piece I played on was the Schumann piano quintet that ended the program, and it was really so much fun to work with her and Dennis and Bridget and Meredith. It was a blast. Yeah.
Awesome. And are there performances scheduled for this coming season, if all goes well?
Yes, there are. I believe we talked about that maybe a month or so ago, and I need to take another look at the list and the program. But something that I was really excited about is that Orly and I are scheduled to play the Britten Sonata for cello and piano, which is an underperformed work and one of my favorites.
Oh my gosh,
it's really great.
That'll be very cool. So yeah, so I think it's on the website, but anyway, for anybody who's interested, Cafe Ludwig, check it out. So also, just as a reminder to everybody, we've been getting some questions. We had some submitted ahead of time. We've had some in the chat, the Q&A, but for anybody who's new to this format, if you do have questions, I'm going to save some time at the end for a lot of them. So feel free, there's that Q&A button at the top of the screen. You can use that, or you can just type it in the chat and we will see it and we will do our very best to get to it. Before we sort of move on from chamber music, I just have a personal question. I've always been really jealous of the string quartet literature, because I'm sorry, but wind quintet's just never going to be the same. I have my own sort of wish list if I were a string player, what to play. But I'm just curious, like, do you have a favorite piece that either you got to perform with Verona or one that you have always wanted to perform? Like I'm just curious what some of your favorites are.
There's really so much, and composers wrote some of their most experimental and personal works for string quartet. So that's a tough question to answer, but we played Ravel Quartet a lot, which was his only string quartet. It's an amazing piece. I never played Beethoven Opus 59 number 1, which we were scheduled to play on Cafe Ludwig with the string principals in May. Unfortunately, it was canceled. Also, this is just something I've been listening to a lot recently, because I could probably name a lot more pieces and bore you all, but something that's been really, I think, a great string quartet to listen to these days, especially, is a late Beethoven quartet, Opus 132, the A minor quartet. The third movement is written. There's a German title that I'm too afraid to say, because I'll mispronounce it horribly. But basically, the idea of the movement is being sick and then feeling that return to health. And he had written it just after he had a very serious health scare, and he thought he wouldn't recover from it. And then this movement is just kind of a ray of hope. And that movement in and of itself is like 15 minutes, and it's just it's really stunning. So I'd definitely say it's recommended listening these days.
So you said that was the Beethoven Opus 132 A minor?
Yeah, the third movement.
Okay,
I believe.
Great. I'm jotting this down. I'm hoping maybe we could even put together a Spotify list for everybody. If people are curious to go check out some of these. Okay, so I think it's time for some more music. What do you think?
Sure.
So I think up next we've got a selection from the Bach cello suites again. This is from the 5th suite, and it's the Sarabande that you were talking about earlier in terms of the form.
Sure, yeah. So this is really one of the most stunning movements of the suites, and the reason I wanted to bring it as an example is just to show the emotional depth and the range emotionally of all the suites. The 5th suite is in C minor. It's one of only 2 minor suites, suites in minor key, and it really kind of plumbs the depth of despair, and it's very melancholic. And he actually, for this piece, he wrote for the cello tune. The tuning is what's called scordatura, which means that one of the strings is tuned down to a G. So the A string goes down to a G. I'll show you in just a second. Other composers use this technique too. The famous Kodai cello sonata tunes the bottom 2 strings down by a half step. It's a pretty cool effect.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this one basically has a G string, a D string, a G string, and a C string. So there's 2 Gs, and it really brings out kind of a different resonance in the instrument. Tuning down now. So here's what the cello sounds like. And if anyone's wondering that as a string player, usually cellists don't tune with these pegs up here because they're really hard to move. I get asked that sometimes, and my response is usually that I'm just very, very strong. But the real answer is that I have these what are called gear pegs. So these pegs basically function as fine tuners that you would have down here, which I'm missing here. So
oh, amazing. So normally you would tune it down with the down at the bottom of the strings.
Yeah, but doing this makes it a lot easier to do these scordatura things in a live performance, which is fun.
Very cool.
So here's the Sarabande.
Okay, Sarabande from the 5th suite. Amazing. That was so beautiful.
That's one of my favorites because it really reminds me of, there's a movement from the B minor mass, the Agnus Dei, which has a lot of similar kind of really chromatic and interesting intervals and strange leaps, and it's really beautifully lamenting. But while it does that, it still maintains the same. It's still a dance. Like I said earlier, a Sarabande has the second beat is the strongest, and you can hear in that. That's where a lot of those unresolved intervals are, the strange kind of appositors. And if you kind of contrast that with the Sarabande to the first suite, which I'll tune back up for. Still has that kind of 1-2 feeling to it. So that's just,
yeah, it's amazing. And I think it's interesting when you talk about, you know, it's interesting how in a lot of pieces Bach actually would get incredibly chromatic. Another piece that comes to my mind is, I think, the fugue from the B minor, from the Well-Tempered Clavier, the second book, the B minor fugue. It's similar. It's almost a 12-tone row, but there's something about the way he's able to manage that and sort of have this internal structure about it that still makes music, like harmonic sense. I find it really fascinating.
Wow, I need to listen to that.
Well, me too.
It's from the second book, he said?
I think it's the second book. I may be wrong, but I think that's what it is. We had a question about the Sarabande you just played from Rosalind. Hi, Rosalind. And I don't know if you know the answer. I'm not sure, but she was wondering if this is the piece that Yo-Yo Ma played at the 9/11 memorial.
I believe it was. Yeah, I know he recently also played it at a UN gathering. But I think he either played this one or it was a Sarabande for sure. I think it was this one. Good question.
Okay, great. And we had a question that I think maybe applies to this, that was submitted earlier. Someone wondering, among the great cellists, how do bowing techniques vary from person to person? Like, is there a lot of variation, or is it pretty standardized?
I saw that question. That's an interesting one. Yeah, it's I think it varies among great cellists, but then also it's kind of changed over time. From cellists I've talked to who have been around a long time and studied with, I guess for lack of a better term, very old school teachers. The bow grip was a lot more kind of together with the fingers versus, I don't know if you can see this in your cameras.
Yep.
I think nowadays most cellists play with the fingers more spread out, but I've heard that one of my teachers at Indiana, Eric Kim, he said that one of his teachers growing up had him play with pieces of paper in between each finger, and if he dropped one of them, then that was, you know, a problem.
Oh wow!
I think that kind of approach to the bow lends itself to, at least in my experience, to more kind of violinistic playing, and it's easy to do kind of off the string short staccato strokes with that. Versus if you spread the fingers out a bit more, then I feel like he can kind of dig in to the string, which is why I prefer it a bit more. Another variation that I see with great cellists is I think when you get to the frog of the bow, how much you're supinating with the elbow and the forearm versus pronating, which means to kind of sink in and turn the forearm back. Some cellists really kind of sink in, and it allows you to really get a lot of arm weight into the lower strings and draw out a lot of depth from the instrument. I think of Lynn Harrell specifically for that. And then I was watching a video of Yo-Yo Ma recently, and I noticed that he's very still when he does his bow changes, but then if you listen to it, he's pretty incredible because he plays so legato, and he can play something like the Swan. I saw him playing where he took a different bow for each one of the notes, and you can't tell he's taking different bows. So I've been trying to mess around with that recently, because something about what he's doing just lends itself to the most incredible singing legato. I don't know how he does it.
That's amazing.
I think that's all I've got on that topic, but that's a really good question and something I want to keep researching. And I'm always kind of fiddling around with my own bow stroke, and being a cellist that was in a quartet, I always like to try to bring the most resonance out of my instrument as possible to support the group from the bass up. So I was trying to figure out ways to get more kind of bass and resonance out of the instrument with my bow arm. So something I'm
That's
always thinking
amazing.
about.
Well, I think that anybody who's heard you so far in Segerstrom Hall, like when you've had a solo, can attest that you have one of the most resonant cello sounds that anybody.
Thank you, Ben.
I remember, I think it was in the Elliot Goldenthal premiere that we did, October Light in December, where you had this cello solo, and I had to look over to see if you were amplified with the microphone. It was amazing.
Thank you. That's a beautiful piece. I love playing.
Yeah, that was really cool. I wanted to sort of move, before we get to the question and answer section of our event, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, the other thing that I find really interesting about your background is you've been really involved in music education. Sort of like I mentioned before, you've taught at basically all levels of music education. Particularly being a teaching artist at Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles and being director of Junior Chamber Music LA. I'm curious, like, have you always been interested in that side of things, and sort of maybe why, and why do you feel it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. Teaching is something I've always really gravitated towards, whether it's working with students one-on-one or working with groups to doing master classes. I'd say I sort of started it during my time at school as a teaching assistant and working with other chamber groups. As my quartet started its career in the beginning, we did a lot of community engagement programs. We would often go to a city we were playing a concert in, and the day before the concert or the day of the concert even, we would go to a school and do community engagement, often in underprivileged areas in the city, which I thought was hopefully was very impactful. When you're playing in a gym with like 200 kids in it, doesn't always feel like everyone's paying attention, but if you can even get one person interested in playing the cello, then I think it's worth it. One person in the room. Actually, a funny story about that. One of my first experiences doing a community outreach was in a grade school. We had feels like the whole school in the gym, and we were doing some sort of exercise. We were talking about how playing a team sport relates to playing chamber music, something about passing the ball, and I took the microphone and I said to all of the kids, now if anyone has a favorite sport here, I want you to shout it out. And then for the next minute, every kid in the school was proceeding to shout out their favorite sport, and all I just heard was ball, 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 like over and over again. It took the teachers to get them to listen again. But that was, anyway, it was really, really rewarding work. And I've continued that with private teaching and also working with, like you said, JCM and Yola, and also a similar program to Yola in Glendale, California, called Caesarea Youth Orchestra, which is also an El Sistema, based on the El Sistema model. And that's, I did have to, when I took the job with PSO, I discontinued work with those organizations, but I have been, I've been doing some substitute teaching for them, at least before all the lockdown things happened. So it's been really important to me.
And can you just explain for a second, for people who may not be familiar, what the El Sistema model is? Because I think it's really cool. And
yeah, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here on any of my facts, but it was, it's probably, it's easiest to remember it as where Gustavo Dudamel was trained and got his beginnings in music. It was a government-funded program in Venezuela. I believe it started in do you know what year it started? I don't know off the top of my head, but it's been around for a long time.
We can look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Maybe someone in the chat will correct us. But it's government funded, so it was free music education that was often given to kids in underprivileged areas, which is so important because even though we were talking about this earlier, Ben, even though it's a lot of people look at orchestra auditions and these competitions and say, oh, 1975, that's from my wife.
Thank you, Rosa.
So even though you have these competitions that are as fair as possible and as fair as they can be, and auditions behind a screen, which seems to be the great equalizer in a way, there's still a lot of built-in inequalities that exist, and it's hard for kids from underprivileged areas to get access to weekly music lessons with a great teacher. So these programs like YOLA and other El Sistema programs are just, you know, helping to level the playing field to some extent, but I think it's just the beginning of the work that we have to do as society.
Totally. I think it's a great point. It's like, you know, for these professional auditions, like both you and I, for example, when we auditioned for the Pacific Symphony, we played all the rounds behind a screen. Theoretically, no one knew who we were. We didn't see who was behind on the other side, which is about as fair as you can be. And yet, I think, you know, sort of the nature of music performance, I mean, a lot of, especially, you know, violinists and pianists, oftentimes they're starting to play their instruments and learn their instruments around the same time they're learning to talk. So
Yeah.
if you're not sort of in a situation as a child to have the resources and the support around you to sort of get that training really early on, it's like you're at a severe disadvantage. And so I think that's why it's so important to really try to figure out how to reach kids like that and sort of make sure, because there's not even really a way, like if you reach someone by the time they're 15, like playing catch up at that point when you're now, what, 12 years behind other violinists is very difficult.
Yeah.
And I think,
and it's
you know,
definitely
talking about,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to PSO for all of their wonderful community engagement programs. It's really important that we keep those going, you know.
Yeah, totally. And you know, like mentioning El Sistema, for example, I think that someone like Gustavo Dudamel or any of the members of the Simon Bolivar Orchestra are great examples of people who, you know, if El Sistema weren't around, maybe wouldn't have had a structure to sort of enter this world and to achieve what they've achieved, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's a really, really good reminder of how important music education is, and getting music education, bringing it to people where they are and not always expecting them to come to us.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we start our question and answer session, I'd love to hear this Gigue from the third suite, from the Bach cello suites.
Sure. All I can say about this is it's the polar opposite of what the last movement I just played. Just make sure I'm in tune here. So this is the Gigue from the third suite in C major. Not sure if you just said that. Did you just say that?
This is great.
Okay.
Gorgeous. Love it. Okay, so question answer time. Let's see how many of these we can get to. So we've got one question about how has this period of quarantine impacted you creatively? How have you expanded your skills and repertoire or otherwise grown as an artist and member of the symphony?
Wow, great question.
Apart from all the Bach cello suites.
Yeah, well, it really, and I focused so much on the Bach cello suites, and I think doing that really made me even more kind of motivated to someday get them recorded professionally with something else besides an iPhone to play into. And that was really helpful for learning how to practice effectively, since I was recording a movement a day, essentially. I sort of wavered from that once I got to the harder suites at the end. But I would practice one for one day, and then try to figure out how to get them performance ready in one day. Whereas usually I'm a little more hesitant to roll out performances when things still feel like they're in beta mode, if that makes sense. So I think it kind of inspired me more to just put out a performance, even if it doesn't feel like it's totally ready. That's okay. It was just about connecting with the audience, and that was a different feeling. I think that will impact me going forward with when I perform and kind of my practice routine also. And since then, I've been looking for other projects to work on. I was really inspired listening to a lot of recordings of the great cellist Lynn Harrell after he passed away in April. That he had a father who was a baritone, a famous baritone, and he listened to his recordings of Schubert Lieder and really tried to imitate that sound on the cello. So I've been listening also to a lot of Schubert and just vocal music in general, and trying to find a more vocal way of playing the instrument. So that, and then I've also been trying to tackle some concertos that I don't know as well, and trying to get them up to speed a little bit. I was working on Shostakovich's first concerto, which I've never performed, and I really want to someday.
Ooh. Yes, arts administrators, anybody who's listening, take note. No, that's awesome. And I think it was really interesting what you were saying about sort of like just putting things out there in terms of connecting with people, because I don't know about you, but I think that one of the takeaways I've had from this whole thing is never to take for granted live performance again, and getting to connect with people, sort of, whether it's outdoors or in a concert hall. I think for most of us, that's really at the heart of why we became musicians in the first place. So
Absolutely.
I think it's a great lesson to take forward. Okay, another question. Oh, where was it? I think it was in the chat. I thought it was very interesting. If you were stuck on a desert island for the rest of your life and only had 3 instruments along with the people who knew how to play them, what would they be and why?
Is that like different types of cellos or different instruments in the orchestra?
Let's say different instruments in the orchestra. Or
okay,
both.
I'll answer that. And then if you wanted to know about different types of cellos, like different cello makers, I can answer that too. Different instruments. Okay. Well, that's my brother, Dan. Hi, Dan. So besides cello, I would pick piano, clarinet, and I'd say violin, top of my head.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, Ben. Flute's up there. I'd say number 4.
I don't need you. Just kidding. Any particular reasons why? Just because you like them, or is it about playing together?
I like them, like the repertoire. I know probably a lot of people would say piano and violin, but a string player saying clarinet, there's a lot of string and clarinet repertoire that's really made me fall in love with the clarinet, and just how vocal of an instrument it is, and it's really fun to play with, and a lot of great music for it. So that's why I would say that.
Awesome. We had another question submitted about, do you know of any flute and cello duets for recreational musicians?
Oh yeah. I was thinking about that a while back, and the one that comes to mind is Villalobos, although that's a little bit tricky to put together, but the jet whistle. Have you played that one?
I've played, yeah, I have. I don't know if I've ever performed it, but yeah, that's a great one. It's really fun. Another one I don't know if you're familiar with, a Japanese composer named, I think it's Yuko Uebayashi, has an amazing 5 or 6 movement sonata for flute and cello that's really beautiful.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Also on the trickier side, but very gratifying.
Yeah, that's a good
Going back to Derek Spiva from the first thing in the hour, he has a very interesting piece I was just listening to today. It's a duet, but it can be played by any 2 instruments basically. And So that could be a fun option. I can't remember the title of it, but if you go to Derek Spiva's website, it's on there. I think the recording on there is for 2 saxophones. So
It's a
I
good
think it'd be
suggestion.
much better for flute and cello.
You can also take any, well, not any, but you can take some violin and cello pieces, and I think it could work on flute and cello. There's a Haydn duo for violin and cello that can work for flute and cello as well.
Yeah, and also if you can rummage up a second flute player, there's sort of a dime a dozen. The Haydn London trios are another great option. 2 flutes and cello.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question. Do cellists or other string players for that matter, end up with carpal tunnel-like issues?
Yeah, I think it does happen. I've been fortunate to so far be able to avoid any major injuries. But I think that I've seen some people develop it more in their left arm, left hand and wrist area as a result of trying to vibrate in different ways, and maybe ways that don't work well with their bodies. Everyone plays the cello differently, as I'm sure is the case with every instrument. You have to kind of figure out what works best for your body and how to use it. And vibrato is one thing that can really lead to injury if it's not done in the most ergonomic way. I'm not sure if I'm using that word right.
No, it seems right.
Seems right.
Yeah, when it seems like cello, just by virtue of the size of it and how you hold it, is a very physically demanding instrument, very physically demonstrative instrument. So I imagine it takes a lot of thought in terms of trying to really be as ergonomic as possible.
That's a good point. Although I have to say, I'm not sure how violinists do this position for their whole lives. That just hurts doing it, you know?
Yeah, and violas, my goodness. I've been on a tear.
Really.
I have a campaign I need to start where I think violists should hold their instruments on their laps like this and play. But nobody seems to care about it.
Position. Yeah, I'll sign up for
that. Then we had a related question. What about wind players? Do they get any work-related injuries? And yes, they do. I'd say carpal tunnel is common. Probably the most famous example of that is Jeannie Baxtresser, who was the principal flutist of the New York Philharmonic, and before that, the Montreal Symphony, who carpal tunnel syndrome actually ended her career early, her performance career early. She became a very famous pedagogue after that. One of the other things, I'm not sure how much people know about this who aren't musicians, but I think for most musicians, focal dystonia is often a very scary and maybe not common, but like definitely a problem that exists, which is basically where when you do a repetitive motion, whether it's for us with our lips or with certain fingers, basically your body says, no, we're not doing that anymore. So I've heard of flute players who, whenever they put their hands on their flute, their left hand will just start spasming out of control. It will not do that anymore. Or if they put the flute to their face, they lose the ability to control that. And that's a scary thing. Does that happen with cellists also?
I don't know of any cellists that have had that. The famous cellist Jacqueline Dupre, her career ended and eventually she passed away from multiple sclerosis, although I believe that's more of a genetic thing, is it not? Again, in the comments if you know better than me.
Is there a doctor in the house?
But it's amazing if you listen to Dupre's recording. She did so much, and she accomplished so much as an artist. And basically, I think that MS was affecting her when she was like 30 years old, and it was really tragic. And just imagining how much more she would have recorded and played if that had happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that like you were saying, it's like if we sort of think of this as a very not just artistic profession, but also sort of a very physical one. It's like, you can take certain precautions to really, warm up your body like an athlete would, and just take care of your body to try to minimize the risk to these things as much as possible. Well, it is 6:07. So I just want to thank you so much for coming in and doing this. This has been very enlightening for me. And I'm just, it's really cool for I think for me and for all of us to, really get to know you in this sort of way, which feels, even though we're in different cities and whatever, it feels very like we're right in a living room together.
Thank you, Ben. You did such a wonderful job. And this is, you're a really wonderful interviewer and fun to talk to.
Well, right back at
I
you.
also
This is
just want
a
to
lot
take
of fun.
a brief moment to thank everyone. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah,
I just want to take a brief moment to thank everyone with PSO and the staff, administration, and all the musicians for supporting us, and all the donors as well, and audience for supporting us during these crazy times. It just really means so much to be part of such a wonderful family. So thank you.
Yeah, ditto to that. And so for everybody who wants to tune in, we're going to be having in the next few weeks a number of different guests. Ones that I can confirm now will include Meredith Crawford, our principal violist, and my neighbor and one of my very best friends. Rose Corrigan, our principal bassoonist, and I would wager probably the most listened to bassoonist on the planet, since she has played for pretty much every movie most of us have ever gone to see. Wow. And then we'll also be hopefully inviting some special guests from outside the symphony. So keep an eye on your email for all of those announcements. And if you have any particular guests that you would like to see us invite, I think we'd definitely love to hear from you. So feel free to write in. And I just want to thank and thank you all for these nice messages too. Anyway,
thanks,
thank you everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. And Warren, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks everyone for being here.
Bye.
Bye.